I could drive to the moon at an average speed of 50 miles an hour, it would take me 7 months to get there. In astronomical terms, it's a tiny distance, a mere 250,000 miles. And the moon, our closest neighbour in space, still exerts a powerful influence on us here on Earth.
A source of ancient superstitions, or just a serene presence in the sky? The cause of solar eclipses and the pull of tides. The moon matters to us, even in a car park in broad daylight.
When the sun is in the sky, then by definition it's daytime, but the moon, by contrast, is not always there in the night sky. Here we are, it's a nice blue sky, and there's the moon in the daytime sky. Now here's a little trick I quite like. If I hold this white ball up in the sunlight, it'll show me a phase, just like the moon. If I move the ball around so I view it from different directions, I can see different phases. But when I hold it so that from my viewpoint it's in the same direction as the moon, then it shows the same phase as the moon itself. How long does the moon take to go around the Earth? 24 hours is the common answer, and it's true, we see the moon roughly every 24 hours, but that's caused by the Earth's rotation. The Earth goes round once a day, but the moon takes just under a month to orbit the Earth. So every time the Earth turns and we see it again, it's moved on a bit. When the moon is round here, near the sun, we see a new moon. 7 days later, it has gone a quarter of the way round, and we see the first quarter. Another week, and we see the full moon.
Half the moon is always lit by the sun. It's just a question of how much of the lit half we can see from Earth. A new moon looks like a letter C written backwards. Day by day, the appearance changes. This period of growing, the first half of the lunar cycle, is called waxing. After 14 days, we can see a full moon. The moon then appears to decrease or wane. The lunar cycle takes 29.5 days. Then it starts all over again. The phases of the moon have altered the pattern of our lives in some curious ways. The harvest has been cut and the sheaves arranged in stooks, which have been drying in the field. They used to say that the church bells need to ring for 3 Sundays over the stooks before they're properly dry. Then everyone would help, and so long as it was light enough to work, they would keep going as long as they possibly could, making hay while the sun shone. They couldn't afford to stop. It could rain at any moment and ruin the harvest, so they worked on and on as the shadows lengthened. But just as the sun finally set in the west, a new source of light arrived. A faithful friend rose in the east, the harvest moon. A full moon that would shine down and provide light enough to continue working through the night. It's not just luck that makes the harvest moon a bright, full moon that's out all night. A new moon will appear in the sky near the sun, and because of the Earth's rotation, will set shortly after the sun. This new moon, filmed just after sunset, will set in an hour or so. So it's impossible for a new moon to be seen in the middle of the night. But a full moon is on the opposite side of the Earth to the sun. It rises 12 hours after the sun, so it's going to be up in the sky during the hours of darkness. The full moon, which coincided with harvest time, got the nickname of the harvest moon. It rose just as the sun was setting and stayed in the sky all night. There are 12 full moons during the year, and they all have different associations to different people. We call the full moon after the harvest moon the hunter's moon. In winter, the Indian tribes of North America have a tree-popping moon. In the spring, it's called little frog-croaking moon. Many societies base their whole calendar around the moon. The Islamic month is based on the lunar cycle, possibly because the Prophet and his early followers in Arabia were desert people who travelled by night, out of the heat of the sun, and so the moon was important to them.
The lunar month is very easy to measure since you can see the phases, but unfortunately the lunar month doesn't fit neatly into a year. 12 lunar months equals 354 days, 11 days short, and 13 lunar months is too many to fit into the year, which is why the phases of the moon never coincide with our 12 calendar months. It's a pity, really.
Since our months are either 30 or 31 days long, and a lunar month is 29.5 days, it's just possible to have two full moons in the same month. Traditionally, the second full moon in the same month is called a blue moon. It doesn't happen very often, once every 3 years or so.
Harvest moon, blue moon, hunter's moon, and a new moon to bring you luck. Folklore says that the first 14 days when the moon is waxing is a time of good luck. Projects will prosper, crops will grow, and so on. While the second half of the cycle, when the moon is waning, is unlucky.
Some old superstitions, though, may have a basis in truth. There's an old sailor's story that says when you see this, the old moon in the arms of the new, it's bad luck. But why? Imagine a nearly new moon. A person standing on the moon will see the opposite, a nearly full Earth. It will shine down onto the moon, Earthlight rather than moonlight. And it's that Earthlight that's showing us the dark part of the moon, although only faintly. But why should sailors beware? The biggest influence on the tides is the moon. The gravitational pull of the moon produces a strange effect on Earth. The oceans bulge slightly in not one, but two places. This bulge is pulled towards the moon. The other one, further away, is slightly left behind in space. The Earth spins, but the two bulges don't move much, so there are two tides a day. But the sun also affects the tides. When the sun and the moon are here, pulling in different directions, we get lower than average tides, the neap tides. But when it's a new moon, the sun and the moon are in line, so they pull together, and we get especially high tides. They're called spring tides, although they happen twice every month. Perhaps the thought of putting to sea in the extra high tides is the true story of the old moon in the arms of the new.
This stone circle at Castle Fraser in Aberdeenshire was built about 4,000 years ago. It's what's called a lunar recumbent circle. And what we have here is a ring of stones, and then sandwiched between these two uprights a horizontal or recumbent stone. And while there are a number of these in northern England and in Scotland, there are very few elsewhere in the world. So why were the circles built here and almost nowhere else? And what exactly did they measure?
Nobody's quite sure, but we do know that this is a lunar circle, and the people who built it must have observed the moon very carefully for generations. Every 18 years, something spectacular happens. The moon rises just a few degrees above the horizon and seems to roll along the top of the recumbent stone before setting again. One theory says that this is the closest the moon goddess would ever get to visiting Earth. But you just wouldn't see the same effect in London. Just like the sun, the moon rises in the east and sets in the west, but the full moon is highest in the winter and lowest in midsummer. Further north, in Scotland, say, that same midsummer moon will be lower in the sky. But the full moon doesn't reach the same height every summer. There's a long cycle, and every 18 years the moon reaches its lowest point, and here in Scotland, it's only just above the horizon.
We can only imagine what sort of ceremonies might have taken place at this and other stone circles scattered around northern Britain. But it does show how important the moon was to the people who lived here 4,000 years ago.
But these stones could have had another quite dramatic use. Because of the yearly variation of the moon's orbit, you can sometimes get a lunar eclipse.
Basically, a lunar eclipse happens because there's a shadow here on this side of the Earth. If the moon passes into this shadow, then we see an eclipse. And of course, since the shadow is on the other side of the Earth to the sun, the only phase of the moon that can have an eclipse is a full moon.
But if the moon passes directly between the Earth and the sun, then from the Earth we see a solar eclipse. It's very dramatic when the sun is partially or even completely blotted out in the sky. This darkness at noon must have terrified people who didn't understand what was happening. The daylight goes. It feels cold. Birds stop singing. Some people thought that the sun had been swallowed. Anyone who could predict when the Earth, sun and moon would all be in line would be pretty powerful, for they might be able to predict eclipses. And wouldn't you know it, eclipses occur in a pattern lasting about 18 years, and then the pattern repeats itself. So as well as worshipping the moon goddess, maybe this circle, with its 18-year cycle, was used to predict eclipses as well.
When I was a boy, about 8 years old, I got a chance to look through my grandfather's telescope. He had one of those brass folding ones, and it was good enough for me to see things like the craters on the moon. It was one of the things that I remember first got me interested in astronomy.
I think originally I got into astronomy at the age of about 8 years old. A lot of people get into it at about 8 or 10 years old. I joined the Brownies, and it was a close enough meeting place that I was allowed to go by myself. It was only just down the road. So instead of the parents taking me by the hand and saying, "Come on, hurry up, Fiona, we're going to be late," I could wander down the street myself and notice that there were shiny things up in the sky, and I wanted to know more about them.
Fiona Vincent runs a public observatory in Dundee. It's a bit like a museum, but they have to keep somewhat longer hours.
The purpose of this observatory is really to introduce people to the sky. We're working mainly with people who know nothing about astronomy, who have simply noticed that there are shiny things up there and they might like to know a little bit more about them. So partly we're letting people see through a big telescope, see the rings of Saturn or the craters on the moon close up. Partly we're just taking them out under the heavens, showing them the constellations, saying, yes, that one is the Great Bear, that one is the pole star. In a sense, that's more useful because when they get home, they can still find it. Mind the stairs, they're rather steep. Just come across this way. If you'd like to stand just across there for the moment, until we get used to the dark, find out what we're looking at. Okay, if we just come across here just now till you get your eyes used to the dark. Now this is where we all have to button up and wrap up because it's going to get even colder in here. I'm about to make a hole in the roof. We've got to open up a section there and slide it back so that we can see the stars. I do that with a wheel over here, you can see this. That's looking to the southeast. We're going to want to look south tonight. There's only the one that opens, but the whole dome turns around. So I'm going to go and move it across here. If you're standing against the walls, I suggest you stand clear of it. And if you get dizzy easily, I suggest you cover your eyes. So, here we go. Strange feeling, isn't it? And I think that should just about do. So that's the dome sorted out. Now we've really got to look at is the telescope. This, as you have realised, is the telescope. It's quite a big animal, as you can see. In a few moments, we're going to be setting that onto the moon. Now, once we've got it set onto the moon, it's no good just standing there and leaving it like that, because as the Earth turns, the sun in the daytime moves across the sky, the moon, the stars, the planets, everything keeps moving from east to west. We have to chase it with the telescope. We could just nudge the telescope every few minutes, but that would be rather awkward. We have a motor for it. But if you remember, the date on the telescope is 1871, so it's no good expecting high-tech electronic gadgets on this. This has got a clockwork motor, which will be ticking away the whole time that we're observing. This is a wind-up telescope. I have to wind it up about once an hour. I have to wind it up. And then what you have in there is essentially the insides of a clock, just a lot of little brass cogwheels. It's turning a shaft up the side, it's turning gears at the top, and that big brass wheel is slowly turning around. Now, you could watch it and never think it's moving, because if you watched it for a whole day, it would only go round once, because that's the speed the Earth turns, once round a day. So it cancels out. Even though the Earth is turning, once we've locked onto an object, we will be following it across the sky. If we turned that off while you were watching, the thing would just move out of the picture as quickly as that. Now, the telescope itself only sees a very narrow piece of sky, so it has what we call a finder scope on the side, with a much wider field of view, and yes, I think we've just about got that. Now I clamp it into position, and hopefully, in here, you'll have something to look at. I've got it there, but I haven't quite got it in focus yet. Yes, I'm just going to select one little section there, a nice little string of craters right on the edge of the shadow. Oh, those look quite nice. I'm going to have a look. Go on.
Yeah, right. Well, when you see these pictures, it's just like that. That's amazing.
What sort of size are the craters?
Well, they're pretty big. That's just one small part of them. And those craters are about 60 miles across. So gives you some idea what you're looking at.
Terrific. I can't believe that was so many miles away.
A lot clearer here. You can see the craters well.
Yes, the short one, aren't they?
Snowing up there as well, do you think?
You'll just have to move your head around to get it in.
Yeah, I've got it.
You've got it?
Oh, yes. Oh, it's lovely, isn't it? Smashing.
The moon is the same distance from the sun as we are, as the Earth is, so its average temperature is the same as Earth. But it doesn't have an atmosphere, so there's no protection. The hot is much hotter and the cold is much colder. The temperature on the daytime side of the moon gets pretty high. Can't quote your figure, but a lot higher than you would get on the daytime on Earth. The other thing is the moon turns so slowly. A day isn't only 12 hours of daylight, you get up to 14 days of daylight, our days.
Remarkable, isn't it?
It's lovely. This is actually almost a first quarter moon. Quarter means it's a quarter of the way round its orbit. Well, it's just a little bit short of that now. So technically a crescent, but a pretty wide crescent. And where we've got it set up at the moment, you can see the whole thing. You can see how on the edge of the shadow, it looks very cratered. The outer edge is called the limb of the moon, and the edge of the shadow is called the terminator. And out near the limb, it's actually almost midday on the moon, and so the sun's shining nearly straight down. There's hardly any shadows. It looks almost completely flat. Originally, the moon was covered in craters. It had been hit with meteorites all over, craters everywhere. But then, a little later after that, there was a volcanic phase. There was lava oozed up from underneath, and in places it spread out in great pools and flooded out the craters. And then a few meteorites came along afterwards. The way we've got it set at the moment, you can see a few well-spaced craters. But basically that's, now then, the bit we've got it on now. Here we've got the Sea of Tranquility. You might have heard of that one. Yes, indeed, a very famous one. There's a little bit of mountains near the bottom edge, which is the edge of it. Now, if you were to work left from there, back to the edge of the shadow, that is where the Eagle landed. July 1969, the very first landings on the moon, and Neil Armstrong took his first giant step at that point.
Oh. Yes, very good.
Can you see any old spacecraft flying there?
No.
No.
Look at that one. That crater's called Theophilus. And you see this wonderful mountain in the middle. When a meteorite hits the moon, it comes in with so much energy, it actually melts the rock, and you get a splash outwards, like when you drop a stone into a pond, and you also get it splashes up again in the middle. And that's how a lot of these craters do have central peaks. And of course the moon looks different every night, because tomorrow night the Terminator will have moved. Theophilus, you'll never even notice it. It's just because it's catching the shadow. Tomorrow night we'll see something different. Now we're getting down to the southern half of the moon, and this is the bit where the lava never came. For some reason there was only certain areas where the lava broke through. This is the very ancient surface of the moon, and it is covered in craters. Altogether there's over 30,000 named craters on the moon. I don't know, maybe Patrick Moore can read them all off. I certainly can't. But you'll always see small ones overlapping big ones. You never see big ones overlapping small ones. Obviously the big meteorites arrived first. And when they'd all got used up, there were still a lot of little ones left behind. So little meteorites have hit and made small craters on the edge of big ones. And you can estimate the age of a crater just by looking whether it's still sharp and clear and looks as if its outline's perfect or if it's all sort of eroded away. But when we're talking about young and old craters, the very youngest one is getting on for 100 million years old. So we're not exactly talking about recent stuff here.
Looks like planets should look according to the books, doesn't it?
And now we've got right to the other edge of the moon. We've scanned right across it, made our way down the terminator. And this region is right towards the south pole of the moon. That's the bit that nobody has ever got a really good look at. The moon always keeps the same face turned towards us. We never see underneath the south pole. And most of the orbiting spacecraft went round, more or less around the equator of the moon, around the middle. So there's bits there that nobody's yet had a really good look at. Amazing.
If you would like to find out about open evenings near where you live, we've got a list of addresses that you'll find useful. It's free, and if you'd like a copy, just send a large stamped address envelope to Open Evenings, P.O. Box 7, London W3 6XJ.
Places like the Mills Observatory are rare, but all around the country there are amateur astronomy groups, and many of these have a range of telescopes, and some even have their own observatory. Most of them hold open evenings from time to time where you can turn up, look through various telescopes, and there will be people there to show you where to look in the sky and explain what you're looking at. And believe me, it's much more exciting to see something through a telescope than to sit at home and just watch it on television.
Ah, that's wonderful. How wide did you say those craters were?
About 60 miles across.
Well, they don't look it, do they?
Yeah.
Marvellous.
In Heavenly Bodies next Sunday at 11:15, how one of the mysteries of the universe was solved. And a reminder that Peter Davison teams up with Nicola Paget in Ain't Misbehavin' on Tuesday evening at 8:30 on BBC One. To accompany the series, there's a BBC book, The Beginner's Guide to Astronomy, which is available from bookshops.